We're here in a new landscape. It was just planted a couple months ago, and that's the reason it's really quite sparse looking right now. It's actually planned for the maturity of the plant. So over the next couple of years, especially this next growing season, it'll really fill in a lot. But there's some objectives in this garden, many of which were brought to us by the homeowner of how he wanted to use his new garden. This used to all be turf, and now he has a beautiful desert garden that actually pulls him out into it to want to explore it. And I think that's a really important element of any successful garden, is to have a sense of destination and a way to get there. In this instance, we used a couple different materials to create the pathways. First, coming off of the patio, there's a very natural flagstone material that comes out into the garden and then fans out, ends in an informal type finish that pulls you into the decomposed granite pathways. But one of the things that's really interesting is in this pathway, we've used a material called polymeric sand. It's this material right here in between the flagstone. And what it is, it's a sand type material that has a polymer mixed in with it, and when you wet it and clean it off as you do it, it creates a material that stays in place. You don't constantly have that grit coming across the flagstone. It's much easier to keep clean. So then at the end here, it goes on out into the garden, and here we have the decomposed granite pathway. It's the same material that's actually used as the mulch in the garden. Here in the pathways, we've run a plate compactor over it, and you can do this with a hand compactor as well. That makes it very solid. It's a very comfortable material to work with or to walk on. And then here, it's not compacted. This is where the plant material is going to be growing. So it pulls you on out into the garden to this very important destination, a fire pit, a gathering point. And here around the fire pit, we've incorporated boulders that are an element of the landscape, but in this case, they also function as benches, as a seating area around the fire pit, with just one boulder sitting out here by itself as an accent point, and yet again another seat. And another really cool part of this garden, I think, that really brings a lot of contrast in are the different pots. Very colorful and yet earthy materials with some very drought tolerant plants in them. And we've actually added the irrigation system up into these pots so they're watered automatically. In this case, we have a beautiful Russellia, a coral fountain that blooms for about 8 months of the year and just sucks hummingbirds right up to it. So when you're sitting here, you get to enjoy the visits from the hummingbirds. So our client asked us to create an edible space in his garden as well. And so what we've done is we've built a small raised planter with a nice and rich soil in it. And actually this height right here is very intentional. It's actually meant so that you can actually sit on the edge of the veggie garden and do the work that you're going to do. And in this case, we already have some little seedlings starting to come up. And this back wall, you can see that little stick of a plant right there. It's actually a young grape that's been planted. And up above it, there's a couple of wire wall trellises. We call them invisible trellises. It's basically 3 eye hooks in each row that are firmly sunk into the wall, and then a taut galvanized wire run in between. Another really cool element, I think, in this garden that adds a lot of pop to it is the color on the walls, from that very rich chocolate brown to this burnt, rusty orange color that adds a real splash to the garden. And then to the side over here, we've used organic mulch, a wood chip mulch. The wood chips really enhance soil fertility. It reduces ambient air temperatures. It does a lot of really wonderful things for non-desert plants. Here we have a small planting area with a number of desert species. We have some penstemons. This is Penstemon perrii, and you can see we have a beautiful purple hue on top of that kind of bluish green foliage. And soon, with the warmer weather, it'll develop tall flower stalks with really bright pinkish red flowers that'll pull the hummingbirds right in. Hummingbirds love them. Here we have a plant called Purple Heart, Tradescantia. It is it kind of, it doesn't look that good in the winter. It usually falls down, kind of melts away, but then it springs right back with the warmer weather, and it's intensely purple year round. Over here we have one of many different species of agaves. This is not a real large plant at maturity. This particular variety only gets to about 2.5 or 3 feet wide. So while it does have these sharp spines at the end, it'll never grow out to the point where it's intruding into the pathway. And it has not only a very beautiful blue color, but a very bold form, a very strong accent point in the garden. And then here, this poor being is a blue elf aloe. And she's hurting right now. You can see there's a lot of damage on the foliage from the cold weather. It probably came out of a greenhouse. It was planted during the winter, so it took some damage. But here in the center of the plant, it's still nice and green, and it will recover quickly. All of these boulders have been set into the ground. They look very natural, like they've been there for a long time. And that really can make a difference in how a garden looks and feels very natural. And with that, we've used a material that we like to call chunky rock. It's the same material as the boulders, but much smaller pieces. You know, all in all, this is right now a pretty sparse looking garden. And it should look sparse. It's just been planted. As these plants mature, especially after this first spring, it'll be much fuller and it will mature well so that it fills in beautifully and does not become overgrown. I think it's another case of a successful water smart garden.